eLife, a series that aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss the issues that are important to you and your research career. My name's Emma. I work for the eLife Features team, and today we're discussing how to gain your first independent position. Our host is Melissa Gymrek, one of the founding members of eLife's Early Career Advisory Group. I'll pass over to her shortly, but I'd like to quickly explain how you can get involved in the webinar. The webinar will begin with the panelists sharing their stories. Then, in the second half of the webinar, we'll be putting your questions to them. To ask a question, you can type in the question box on the GoToWebinar Functions panel, or you can tweet us at eLife Careers using the ECR Wednesday hashtag, which you can see in the bottom left of your screen. You can also raise your hand using the hand icon on the webinar panel to draw our attention to you if you are happy to speak on the webinar. If so, we will let you know before we unmute you. Please also join us on Twitter after the webinar, where we'll be continuing the discussion under the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Now I'll pass over to Melissa to introduce herself and the panelists.
Hi everyone, and welcome again to our second ECR Wednesday webinar. My name is Melissa. I just started as an assistant professor here at the University of California, San Diego, and I lead a group studying human genetics here. But I'm also a member of eLife's Early Career Advisory Group, or ECAG, as we call it. I just wanted to give a little bit of background on what that group is all about. eLife is a nonprofit research organization backed by three large research funders, HHMI, Max Planck, and the Wellcome Trust. And a unique feature that I really like about eLife is that it's led by real practicing scientists rather than by a group really in the business of making money off of science. And eLife's mission is really bigger than just providing another journal. A major part of its goal is to change the culture of how we communicate and publish our science in a way that maximizes impact and efficiency and transparency and minimizes a lot of the undesirable aspects induced by the constant pressure that we face as scientists to publish really in a select few high-impact journals. eLife recognizes that a big part of this cultural shift is driven by early career researchers. And with that in mind, eLife organizes a number of initiatives aimed at helping out young scientists. One of these is the Early Career Advisory Group, or the ECAG. ECAG is a group of 14 really talented early-stage investigators. The goal of this group is to help eLife identify and shape initiatives to help early career researchers develop strong career paths. I've had the honor of being part of this group for almost 3 years now, and it's been a really fun and diverse group of people to be a part of. Initially, my main motivation for getting involved was thinking about how we could make science, especially computational science, which is what I'm most involved in, more reproducible, but also how we can take advantage of the fact that publication is now mostly online, and how can we leverage new technologies to improve how we communicate our science. But as I've evolved along my own path, I've become more and more interested about how sort of cultural norms in science influence our behaviors, things like authorship policies or journal impact factors that put pressure on us as early career people who need to succeed, and we need to succeed really quickly under a lot of pressure. This webinar series is actually inspired by ideas that came out of this ECAG group, and it's been really fun to see that come to fruition and actually happen. Today's topic is how to get an independent position. I'm particularly interested in this topic because it's something that I spent a lot of the last year learning about and trying to figure out, but something I knew really almost nothing about before I started, and it's something that we don't get any formal training in, and it's not clear where to get the answers to our questions on how to go about this long, hard process. One thing I did learn, which I think you also get from the panelists' stories today, is that there's no one right path on how to get there. There are many different paths to success, and we're here to give some tips on helping figure that out, but just remember there's no one right way to do it. So today you'll be hearing from three panelists who are both early career researchers. First, we'll have Dr. Gunther Hollopeter. He's an assistant professor at the College of Veterinary Medicine at Cornell, And he is a cell biologist studying mechanisms by which cellular machines regulate membrane trafficking in C. elegans. Second, we'll have Dr. Megan Carey. Dr. Carey is a group leader in the Neuroscience program at the Champalimaud Center for the Unknown in Lisbon, Portugal. And she's interested in how individual cellular and synaptic mechanisms work together within neural circuits to control behavior. And then last, we'll hear from Dr. Emmy Verschuren group. She's a group leader there in Finland, and she works on. Before we get started, we're going to have a quick poll to the audience, so if we can bring up that poll.
I can't do the poll. Sorry.
Here we go. Okay, so here's our poll. How would you define your current career stage? You can select one of the following. Are you a PhD candidate or graduate student? Are you a postdoc, but not actively seeking an independent position? Are you a postdoc already actively seeking an independent position? Are you in the early stages of an independent position? Or are you a well-established independent investigator? So if you could fill out the response to that poll, we'd really appreciate that. We'll give you a second to fill that out. Yeah. Great, and I think once we're done with that poll, we can get started with our Dr. Gunther Hollopeter.
Yeah.
So can you share my screen, please?
Yes, certainly. In a second. Sorry, just one second.
And can you see my slides?
Not at the moment.
All right. Can you see them now?
Yes.
Yes.
And is it the full screen?
It is.
Thanks. So as Melissa pointed out, there's many routes to independence. And so what works for one person may not work for another, but I'm going to share some things that I've learned from my own voyage. And so when I was a fourth-year postdoc, my wife's mentor's lab moved to the Stowers Institute in Kansas City. And because we wanted to raise our 2-year-old child at the time together, our mentors in the Stowers Institute worked out a solution so that I could take my projects there and continue my own research in a semi-independent fashion. And at the time, I thought, first of all, I was very scared, and I thought that this could potentially be a bad career choice. But in hindsight, it now turns out that that was the transformative moment in my career development. And the reason for that is that it forced me to really think about who I was as a scientist and what I wanted to do, and ultimately to take responsibility for my own career, which is important, I think, because even though your postdoctoral mentor certainly wants you to succeed and will really help you a lot, ultimately it's your responsibility to find your own route. Additionally, upon arrival at the Stowers Institute, there was a cohort of scientists that really showed that they had a vested interest in my success. And it taught me that it's important to have external environments, or it's important to have external mentors, because what they can help you do is focus on the big picture and identify long-term future directions for your own research program. And that brings us then to the research statement part of an application, in which you need to propose to address a big question in science. And you need to show that you have ways of addressing it that are feasible and innovative and likely to produce funding. And ultimately, this research statement has to weave your past experiences into a narrative that shows that you are uniquely equipped to lead a group into new scientific territory. And then for any application to ultimately be successful, it's important that you match or fit the department or institute that you're applying to. So in other words, why is the institute attractive to you, and what value can you bring to it? And how can you convey this efficiently and succinctly in a cover letter? For example, my faculty position is in a basic science department of a college of veterinary medicine. So within the department, there are world experts in biochemistry and structural biology. And I mentioned that my genetic system, C. elegans, would complement their approaches nicely, and then also that I would like to incorporate the knowledge they have in structural biology into my future research program. Additionally, the teaching responsibilities of this department are to train veterinary students, and so I mentioned that I grew up on a small cattle ranch in rural Idaho, and that I had firsthand knowledge of large animal veterinary medicine. And ultimately, if you do succeed in getting an interview, it's important that you demonstrate that you will be a good colleague. So that means it means that you need to show that you're interested in the department succeeding and that you will be an easy person to work with. And so because of the numbers of people that are applying to these positions, and also because of the need for a fit and match, you're probably going to need some luck. You're really going to need a lot of help. So for example, if we're not for the incredibly generous mentors that I've had and the really helpful people at the Stowers Institute, I would not have succeeded. And finally, this is going to take some time potentially, and so you need to have some patience. And so that's basically what I've learned through my voyage to independence.
Thank you, Gunther. That last slide really resonates with the process that I went through as well. So thank you for that. Now we're going to move to our second speaker, Dr. Megan Carey, who's going to tell us a little bit about her own experience getting to the position.
Hi. Yeah, so I've been a PI here at the Champalimaud in Lisbon, Portugal for 6 years. I'm American and I trained in the US and I have absolutely no ties to Portugal. So people asked a lot how I ended up here, and I figured that I would just take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about my story of exactly how I ended up here, and some of the lessons that I learned along the way that I hope will be generally useful for people looking to move to an independent position. So I guess the story really starts when I decided to apply for jobs. So about 3 years into my postdoc, my husband is also a neuroscientist. We actually met in graduate school and we were at the same career stage. And the first question that we really had was if we wanted to apply for PI positions, and the first question was when to do that. And we knew it would be challenging with the two-body problem. And for various reasons, he was a little bit ahead of me in terms of publications and really being ready to apply. And I asked my PhD supervisor, who's been a really fantastic mentor throughout my career, I asked him, when should we apply? Is it better to apply early? Should I wait till I'm really ready? And he gave me the advice that because the job search process is so competitive in general, and particularly with the two-body problem, he suggested that the rule to follow was to apply early and often. And so I ended up deciding, we ended up deciding 3 years in to our postdocs, when I actually had submitted but did not yet have a research publication accepted from my postdoc. We decided to go ahead and apply for jobs. So the written application for me is important. I think it's really important that you have your own narrative, but a lot of the hard work that goes into the written application, I think you should already have in your mind at the point where you get to that stage. So ideally, you have some idea why you choose the postdoc lab that you do, and you're able to already have in your head where you'd like to go after that. So I think it's important to have that part ready for writing the application. If you have that ready, then the written application itself, I think, can be fairly straightforward. For me, what really was the big challenge and took up most of my attention in the application process was the interview phase. And this is partly because my husband and I were both applying for jobs. He, of course, already having had publications from his postdoc, had many more interviews than I did initially. What was really surprising to me was that I did get some interviews. And I was particularly shocked that the interviews that I got at that stage, which was applying very early, were actually mainly from very top-tier institutions. I wasn't expecting this, but in retrospect, it made some sense. These interviews were from places that saw in my application that I had had a successful PhD, that I was in a strong lab again for my postdoc, and they were willing and able, really, to take risks on somebody who was clearly applying early, but who they thought would be a good fit. And I think they saw that it might be an opportunity to find someone who was a good fit who wasn't yet necessarily so attractive to places that really relied on someone who could turn out papers, right away, or who already had a publication from the postdoc. And then the other thing that stood out, not only were the interviews that I did get from surprisingly top-tier institutions, they were also tended to be from places where people in the search committees either knew me or one of my supervisors. And so I think that's a really critical element. You do need to get out there and get known by people. This is ultimately, they're looking for colleagues, they're looking for someone who they know, and they have 300 applications. So if they know you, that can really help your application stand out. And then once you get in the door for an interview, they want to hear about your science. And so if at that point they're really paying attention to the content and exactly where your papers were published and what stage they are of publication becomes a little bit less important. So at the end of the interview process, I had an offer, a fantastic offer. My husband had a fantastic offer, but the problem was that my offer was in New York and his was in Vienna. And we had to solve that problem by finding a place that would be a good fit for both of us. And sort of late in the process, we heard about this new institute in Portugal that seemed attractive for a bunch of different reasons. And we sent in applications. We were invited to interview. And that's where I really learned that you can learn a lot about places when you're interviewing. So one of the things that you should pay attention to that I think is the sort of mysterious aspect of the job search process is the chalk talk. And I had several chalk talks at different institutes, and what I really learned from the chalk talk is that no two chalk talks are the same, and the differences have more to do with the other people that are in the room who are going to be your future colleagues than they do with your own personal performance. So for me, I came to the Champalimaud and I had an incredibly exciting, creative, just high-level discussion about all of my hopes and dreams in science and the really cool experiments that I wanted to do. That's what they wanted to hear about. And that set the tone for me that this was a group of colleagues that I would really like to be a part of. The other thing that stood out here was that I knew that the way the job was structured is that we have some institutional funding. We're also encouraged to apply, and we do need to apply for external grants to run our projects. But with a recurring level of institutional funding year after year, we're able to try out risky projects that might not be ready for writing a full grant application. And it gives us a lot more flexibility and allows us to take bigger risks in the projects that we do. And I knew I wanted to go in a new direction in my independent lab, and so that was incredibly useful for me. And then the final thing was that although moving as an American to Europe had challenges, I had fallen in love with Lisbon, and I learned pretty quickly that the quality of life here would be very high compared to what 2 assistant professors would be able to have in other, in New York, for example, which was another place that I was considering. So in the end, I ended up here. I would have to say it's completely unexpected that I ended up here. It's sort of, we got bounced around, and but this really ended up being absolutely the right fit for me. And I think one of the keys is you have to be open to unexpected events during the application and the job search process. You're not just trying to find a job offer, you're trying to find the right fit. And to find that fit, you may have to be flexible. You have to consider your science, you have to consider the department that you're going to be in, you have to consider what the job structure is like, whether there's a lot of teaching or more research. you have to consider the quality of life and where you'll be living, and you have to decide which things you want to prioritize over other things. So for me, everything is pretty ideal. The only downside is that I'm far away from most of my family and friends, but on the other hand, I'm in a dynamic, exciting, international, scientific, and personal community.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you, Megan. Really great story. So now we'll go to our last panelist, Dr. Emmy Verschuren, to tell us about her experience.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Gunther and Megan. You've done a great job introducing already some very key aspects of this very, very hard track that we're on. So, yeah, my name is Emmy Verschuren, or Verschuren. I'm Dutch originally. I've landed in Finland after 17 years of living abroad. No, I should say 10 years of living abroad. I've been abroad now for 17 years in total. And yeah, so I've become a citizen of science, of global science, I would say. And I feel that I've been incredibly fortunate to have been given opportunities to work in research labs with great mentors and great institutions. And I think I basically have always just followed the opportunities that arose that seemed to be the ones that were the best ones to take. I'm by nature a very curious person. I'd like to understand things, but I'm also very much somebody who enjoys being in a community. I love science for that reason, and as such, I've always managed to meet and discuss with them and ask questions and to always show up. So I feel that the opportunities that that came to me actually were through that putting myself on the line and organizing things and just showing up and being somebody that people can learn to trust. Scientifically, of course, it's very important that you also build your career around the questions that you're interested in. So I think it's incredibly important to define more or less your vision for at least the next 5 years on a regular basis. So one of the things that I did when I was in the stages, my final career stages in my postdoc, that was when I was in Genentech in San Francisco. I went to some of the career development seminars and met some of the people who were advising the younger generation, and I ended up talking to them afterwards because I realized that they were the ones that were helping people make these choices, and it just gave a lot of confidence into the process that people go through, and it makes you realize that each of our career tracks is so incredibly personal. So I ended through that kind of figuring out, do I want to do a career or not, and do I want to have my own group? I wasn't quite sure. At that time, I was actually contacted by a colleague who was Finnish, who I'd worked with before in my PhD lab, so he knew who I was and how I worked. And he invited me to interview, or to send an application for an institute that was being opened, and so they were looking for international group leaders. That was in Finland. So I ended up applying 4 different positions. 2 positions I didn't get interviews. 2 positions I did, one in my home country in the Netherlands, one in Finland. The one in the Netherlands didn't fit me, and the one in Finland was just perfect. So I feel incredibly grateful. I love Finland from the start. The institute was new, so with a translational and open vision as to where it would go. I was the first international recruit, so I was able to help build the institute, so that was quite exciting. And the leaders were geneticists and genomics aficionados with a broad and big view, so that matched my personality as well. So yeah, I've basically been here now for 7 years. I've still taken on too many things for sometimes, so you have to definitely learn, I feel, as a scientist, if you start your career, to focus in, I think, is a big thing to learn to do, and to learn to say no as well, to hire good people, to really think deeply about what it is that you're really interested in doing and find the right collaborators. Probably a good idea to start publishing fast, even if it's a short paper. I've not done that so well myself. And for the rest, I think it's just that you need to learn to trust yourself and figure out you know, how you can be part of this community. I think this is more and more important now. I think 7 years ago, things were very different than the climate is at the moment. I see it in Finland too. The funding is becoming more limited. People are not able to continue their non-tenure positions very easily. There's a lot of stress and nervousness about this. I think it's probably something that might be reflected even in the global scene right now, that what we're seeing is a lot of competition. And so the question is, how can we work together, I feel, to make that change? And I wish sometimes that there were more people who were active in that area to change the funding structures, and I think eLife is a great example for that reason. So perhaps, you know, right now, if I would advise you to apply for a position, I would definitely take that on board and perhaps even be a little bit revolutionary if you can. But all right, I think that's it for now.
Thank you, Emmy, and thank you to all the panelists. That was really great. Now we're going to open up the webinar to questions from the audience. You can ask questions via the question panel or by going to Twitter and tweeting us at eLife_careers using the ECR Wednesday hashtag. You can also raise your hand on the webinar platform using the hand icon to draw our attention to you if you are happy to speak on the webinar and ask your questions. If so, we'll let you know before we mute you. If you do go that route, please introduce yourself before commenting or asking a question. I guess we're going to see what questions we have. So let's start off with a question. I don't know who this is from, but the question is, how can you stand out when you don't have a Science, Nature, etc. publication and you're applying for your job? Who wants to take that one first? Megan seemed like she had something.
Yeah, sure. I didn't have a Science or Nature paper. I mean, I think there are a few different things you can do. Certainly, as I mentioned, if people know you, that can really help. Right, so they know you, they know your capabilities, they know more than what's on your CV. So that's huge. And if they know your supervisors, that's also helpful. And a supervisor who actively promotes you is invaluable. There's no replacement for that. And then the other thing that is even just becoming more and more relevant is maybe using social media, so Twitter and things like that. I mean, there are certainly people who are very good at distilling scientific findings and discussions and so on, and being out there on Twitter, and then you get known. That's one way you can get known, even if you don't, for whatever reason, go from meeting to meeting, meeting important people in the field on a regular basis.
I would just like to add, so I'll be a little bit revolutionary here. So you need to get away from these type of requirements for faculty positions. So, for example, myself, I had a single eLife paper. So there is some question whether that's equivalent to nature, science, whatever. We could debate that all day. But I think ultimately the key is that the science should speak for itself, and that, for example, my paper, I think, was, you know, it was very meaty, it was a complete story, and that I developed new techniques and really had a creative way of looking at a problem and learning things. And I think that spoke for itself to some people. At least ultimately, this is in part what I heard when I was interviewing, is that really what spoke to the hiring committee was the quality of the science. And so I think if you can try and always do the best science that you can do, and regardless of where it gets published, if you can be proud of that science, I think it should take you forward. And it doesn't have to be a nature or science paper, and we need to get people to read the papers and not just the journal titles and the you know, the abstract, but actually dig down into the paper and read what the content is. And finally, hopefully your letters of reference state this person did really great work, and we really learned something new from what they did, and they approached it in a new and elegant way.
Thank you, Gunther and Megan. Yeah, I would agree very much with this. And I think, I mean, I did not have cell nature science myself. I had some in my PhD. I was lucky that the people from my PhD were the Finns that I collaborated with, so they knew me from that time. But I would say the story is very important, and it's almost a shame that we get rewarded for what we have done, because in the end, what we have done, we know much of that can be gone if you know, if you start your own lab. You're dependent on the people who work in your group for doing the good research. So you become a different person. Of course, you might in the beginning have time to do experiments, and ideally you do, but it does become a different game also when you then become a group leader. So it would be good to think ahead about what it is you really want to do and not focus too much on the past achievements, I would say, in general. It's not, it releases a little bit of the anxiety too.
Thanks, Emmy. And maybe I'll add my own 2 cents, echoing what Megan said. Is I found that the networking part of this was really, really important. And even if you don't yet have, or you're not going to have those Nature Science cell papers, it's really helpful if people know who you are. So I had the opportunity to go to a lot of conferences and get to know a lot of people in my field. So by the time I got to the interview stage, I knew a lot of who those people were, and that made the whole process a lot easier. There's always a human component to everything, so the networking is a really important part.
Maybe, can I just say one more thing about that?
Definitely.
Which I was the first one, I think, to use it, and I hate the word networking. And so I just want to really say quickly that I think, like, if you're doing an event because you feel like it's networking, then you're probably doing it wrong. And I mean, I think the thing to do is not really think of it as networking. I only ever sort of realized I had been networking all along in retrospect, right? Because that's the name for this. But I think, yeah, go to meetings, present your work, present posters, try to present talks if you can. If it's meetings with selected talks, click that box. It's nothing to be shy about. You want to get out there. You want to. The more people that see you, the more people you can talk to. But I think, for me, the most effective networking is real scientific conversations. And those can happen really naturally. And there are different ways to do it, right? It doesn't have to be the kinds of events that you think of as being really networking. It can just be presenting as many posters as you can and having people come to them and engaging them in conversation. It can also just be having friends and going to conferences and meeting your friends' friends. And then ultimately you realize down the line those people become people that you're networking with. So there are lots of different ways to do it, but it should feel natural. Another one that people don't take advantage of very often is, depending on where you are, if you have a seminar series at your institute and there's the possibility to go to lunch with the speakers, do it. You know, that's a great way to meet people, and it's usually after the seminar. Usually there are opportunities after the seminar where you can ask your questions and really engage in real scientific conversation. And it shouldn't be networking for networking's sake. It can all just be accumulated, real, true scientific discussions and friendships, and that's the best way to do it.
Excellent point. Thanks, Megan. Okay, so we're going to take another question. This one is from Brian Groen. So what were the most surprising questions in your one-on-one interviews? Let's start. I can start with Emmy.
Wow, I have trouble remembering if there was any one-on-one questions that were surprising. No, I just remember having conversations, actually. I don't remember there being a moment where I felt like I was on the line. I mean, it's really a process. And so the point that Megan just made about networking, that's actually what you do at the interview. So they're not looking for one particular answer. I mean, there is no one answer. There's only a method or an approach or a way of thinking, or you know, something that just fits the package they're looking for. So I don't think there's any one question that I remember. Yeah.
I remember one in particular, that somebody asked me, how are you different than X? And it was basically a god of the field, like a really heavy hitter in the field, and that, you know, one could see that our research programs could potentially overlap, and it really caught me off guard, and it really points out that you need to not only show how you will become independent from your own mentor, but that how you will uniquely fit into the scientific community as a whole, and how you will survive those initial few years when you're trying to, you know, fly on your own independent wings, and not be crushed by other potential competitors within the field. And so I think it's really important to have that answer ready to go if you do end up getting an interview. That if that comes up, and you probably need to state it specifically in the chalk talk, I think is maybe the best opportunity to really say, like, this is how I'm going to succeed, and be unique and not be crushed.
And I think, just to add to that, that the stage where, if you're trying to figure that out, how you're different from other people and what you uniquely contribute, when you're preparing your chalk talk in the days before your chalk talk, it's probably, again, you're not doing it right. And that's something that you should be thinking about. Maybe it's too late for this particular panel, but that really should be thought about it, especially at the end of the PhD when you're thinking about what to do for your postdoc, because that's really an opportunity. If you, I mean, so for example, I think part of my success in getting an independent position and starting my own lab was that I trained in labs that had some conceptual overlap, but very, very different techniques and approaches for my PhD and my postdoc. So then the combination of my knowledge base was fairly unique for the field. And so I didn't have to struggle with an answer to that question. In fact, I didn't even get asked that question, which I think is sort of unusual because it was really obvious already. So that's the easiest way. The people I know who get that question and don't have an obvious answer to it, it can be super stressful and painful. So it's good to think about ahead of time.
Great. And then I'll add my experience as well. So I was asked a lot of questions during my interviews that I thought were kind of forbidden questions about, you know, my family situation. I would get questions say, oh, I know, you know, your husband's also applying for a job. Did he apply here? Like, why should we hire you? You're never going to come here. And I was kind of shocked because I thought these were kind of off limits for the interview phase. So I would just be aware that those questions can be asked, and my approach to that was to just be totally honest with people. Let them know your situation up front, and they can't help you with their situation if they don't know about it. And even though there are so-called forbidden questions, they will get asked anyway. Gunther. Yeah.
I would just like to add that, so my wife and I were on the job search circuit on the same year, and you know, the N value is very small, but that never happened to me, and it repetitively happened to her. And so I think this is something that we as a community need to take on and make sure that it happens fairly to all interviewees, and that it's not divided based on whatever, sex or socioeconomic background, whatever you want to call it.
Right, that's really interesting. Okay, so now we have a question directed at Megan from Ines Sakura. She says, hi, my name is Ines Sakura, a postdoc at King's College London. Knowing the dark funding landscape in Portugal, and also still with no high-impact papers, would we be competitive to apply for other European funding? Where is the funding and FC coming from?
Right. So here at the Champalimaud, as I mentioned, we have some institutional funding that comes from the Champalimaud Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization. I got pretty lucky. So the first grant, and for those who don't know, Portuguese grants for research are basically non-existent at this point. And I got very lucky. The first grant I applied for once I got here was the HHMI international early career scientist competition. And I got that grant, which was flexible funding. So that, combined with my institutional funding, gave me 5 years in the beginning to try out new things and get preliminary data that I was then able to use to submit an ERC starting grant application from the European Research Council. And I got that as well. So now this entirely new project in the lab that I was able to start with the institutional funds and the HHMI funding is now fully funded through 2020. So that's one way, is to get some kind of startup that can get you started. That's enough to give you a chance to get those publications. I should also mention, I did, of course, have publications for my postdoc by the time I started my job. It was just that they hadn't come out yet when I was applying.
Cool, thank you. And now we have another question. I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce all of the names, but this is from Tanya Das Banerjee. And the question is basically, how do you do a job search? Where do you start? Do you look at job sites online, or is there some other process that you use to start your job search? To know which of the, let's start with Gunther this time.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, there's the obvious places like Nature Jobs, and Science Magazine has listings, but this is another opportunity to use your network and really get out there and ask around at every place where you know somebody. Like, ask them, what do you see on the horizon? Is there something coming up? Is there something where I might even fit? And really pull out the stops and like ask around within your network, because as Megan said, like, this is going to also make the impact of your application maybe a little bit stronger too. So I would say use your network besides the obvious like Nature and Science Magazine listings.
I think this is actually a surprisingly suboptimal part of the process. I found it really difficult to find all the relevant ads. I mean, you can go to the websites, you can go to Nature Jobs, or which, I mean, you have to do this. You can go to Nature Jobs and whatever relevant society, like the Society for Neuroscience in my case, and you can find job listings. But to find them all is really surprisingly difficult, because they're usually ads that go out at some fixed point in time, and they're not all announced in the US. At least there's a cycle, but not all ads come out at that same time. So it's really suboptimal. So networking is super important. Twitter, right? Twitter can be a good place to find ads if you check that. And then within neuroscience, there's a NeuroRumbler site that's been set up to basically collate the jobs, which I think is great. And I hope things like that exist in other disciplines as well.
Emmy, any advice?
Maybe the only other one that hasn't yet been mentioned is to probably send an expression of interest to some institutes that you are interested in, or where you know people already. So kind of have an open application go around. I didn't do that myself, but I've heard other people do it when they're now looking for jobs, that they take a quite open approach, so do not only stick to the things that are advertised. But for the rest, yes, I would definitely recommend the networks, and yeah, in my case, I ended up using the Nature ads mostly.
Great. I must say, I every single place I applied, I got by word of mouth. I don't think I used any of the job sites, and I found that the most effective way, because those are often the ones that are most fitting to you, because those are the ones that your colleagues think, oh, this person might be the right fit for. Let me go after them and see if they're interested in. But just like the career path, the way to find the job openings in the first place is very diverse, which can be frustrating, but brings back again, there's this human component to everything. So, okay, oh, I like this question from Dugu Ospulat. He says, hi. The all-day interview, giving a talk, meeting people, etc. seems intense, especially for an introvert. How do you make sure you're not completely exhausted and you could have your best performance? Thank you. Lots of caffeine, but let's hear you guys a suggestion.
The interview process is hell for introverts. I am fortunately not one, so it wasn't so bad. I would say it's maybe not crazy to ask to have break scheduled during your day before you get there, or even in the interviews, to ask for 5 minutes to use the toilet or something. They won't know that you use the toilet between every single interview.
I second that advice. That was the most helpful thing. Ask for a break after every single one. They won't know.
Yeah. And the other thing for introverts also probably adrenaline is something that keeps you going. So even though it sounds like it's a long day, I find especially on those types of high performance days that adrenaline actually can keep you going much more than you thought that you would be capable of. And especially if you're interviewing from the United States, coming from the United States to Europe. You'll be jet lagged as well. So there's the intense day, and then there's also the lack of sleep, which was definitely the case. I interviewed in Finland when I was in the winter time, and I felt completely out of it. And so I do think that the human body has more capacity, and so to be well prepared. And at the same time to trust that you're much more capable than you think you might be.
I'm not against using performance-enhancing drugs, but in reality,
like caffeine.
whatever works. I mean, but ultimately, I think the key is that you be yourself. Because this has to be a match, because the institute or department is going to be making a massive investment in you, and so they need to see you as you really are. And so going in there pretending to be someone that you're not is not a sustainable method. And the converse to the introvert is to be overly extroverted, and so somebody, a famous scientist, told me if you do get an interview, make sure you don't turn it up to volume 11. So go in there as you are, but realize that these people are looking for a colleague, and so that means the most important thing you can do is show that you're interested in them. And that you're either not interested or that you're so crazy about your own stuff that you have no time for theirs.
I think one more thing that sort of synthesizes both Emmy and Gunther's answers is that also the other thing I noticed was that some interviews that are a day long feel like they're really long, and other interviews that are a day long go by really quickly, right? And this is because of the combination of the adrenaline. And if it's the right fit, it will happen naturally.
Right. I would say the first interview for me was really terrifying. You have to be on your feet for something like 10 hours if you include the dinners and the social events, which are also part of the interview. But then I started to realize after the first one that I shouldn't do this as like a bunch of meetings with people that are out to get me, or I have to be like constantly on guard. These are actually like a bunch of friendly one-on-one meetings with your colleagues or your future colleagues. And often it's just going to get coffee and chatting about your science and hear what they do. Make them talk for a lot of the interview. And that, eventually becomes sort of relaxing and not this big scary thing that, oh my God, I have to be, totally on my game for 10 hours straight. So eventually it kind of became fun. Okay, so I think we'll have our last question. As we're running low on time. So this is from Dennis Eckmeyer. He asked, did you prepare specific applications for a small selection of positions, or did you have a more lax selection of positions? And maybe I'll add that. I saw a previous question about, did you prepare specific applications for each place, or did you kind of just have one major application that you sent everywhere? Any volunteers to start? Emmy, would you like to start?
I think I might have been a bit earlier than the others, but no, I definitely had had only one kind of major research plan application, but then of course the letter is geared towards the place that you're applying for. And very much the preparations for the interview were very much dependent on the people that you're meeting. So I think talk was probably the same. The formats of the interviews, I had 2 interviews, were very different from one another. One was completely open-ended, and the other one was a lot more structured. So yeah, I think it very much is a creative process. And also, once you've been once, then the second time you'll know what to do and not to do anymore. But the application package, if that was the question what was about, was very much similar in my case.
I can echo that the research statement itself maybe went through some slight tailoring, depending, for example, if I was applying to a neuroscience specific search, or maybe a cell biology specific search. Like, you can subtly tailor your research proposal, but where really the tailoring came in was in the cover letter, and that I really, basically agonized for maybe an hour or 2, sometimes even longer, for each individual department that I was applying to. How could I connect with this department? What do I see as like the reason they would want me? Why do I find it attractive? And how might they find me attractive? And really spend some time thinking about how to reach out to them through the cover letter.
And then I guess just to add to that, in terms of the number of applications, which was part of the question, some people will tell you that you should apply to everything, because once you get an offer, you can use that to negotiate to get a better offer somewhere else and so on. And I don't agree with that. I think you shouldn't apply anywhere you don't actually want to go, because there's actually quite a lot of investment in the interview and negotiation process. And it's a waste of your time and a waste of their time to go through that. So it's a mix, of course, because the success rates are very low. So you do have to apply for more places than more than one job. And I also said you should be flexible. So I did apply to Portugal, even though I thought the chances of my coming here were small, but it was an intriguingly small possibility. So it's a mix, it's a balance, but I don't agree with people who say that you should send in 50 applications.
Right, and if you send in 50 applications, it's kind of impossible to tailor them all individually.
Exactly.
I would add that you don't know until you get to a place, so you might apply to a place saying like, oh, I'm not ever going to go there, and then you go there and you really love it, so it's hard to tell, and I'm not sure what the best advice is there, but you do have to balance. If you get 50 interviews, that means you're going to take 50 days of your life plus or minus travel time, and that just seems a little bit out of control to me. Gunther, it sounds like
you're not going to get, unless you're like one of the few really lucky ones in the search season, you're not going to get 50 interviews. For most mortals, you'll get a small number. But I would just like to reiterate that you don't know necessarily what they're looking for, and some places are going to surprise you, where the ad says one thing and it turns out that they were actually searching for something completely different than what the ad said. So it is worth applying somewhat broadly, but only to those places where you would be willing to move.
And if you're submitting the application, then I think if you're submitting the right applications to the right places that are the best fits for both you and for them, then actually applying to more jobs is not going to get you more interviews, and it's not going to get you more jobs, because you will have found the ones that are the right fit. So that's part of doing the research ahead of time.
Right. Great. Okay, so I think we'll move on to asking the panelists for some final closing remarks. And if you could all tell us what's your main piece of advice for postdocs or other people listening that are going to apply for jobs, what's the one action they can take now to help? Start with Gunther.
use your network. Like, this is going to be, so your graduate mentor is going to be really valuable, your postdoctoral mentor, people that you meet at meetings, people that you've interacted with throughout your entire scientific career. And they are going to be the ones that help you make it. But it really is going to be up to you. Like, you have to take charge of your own career and move it forward, but it's going to be only through a big support group. So be good to your support group.
Mm-hmm. Great. Emmy?
I would say take a leadership course. There's really great ones offered for postdoc as well, and it's a good networking, that word again, opportunity, but also it really gives you a moment to check in with yourself, to realize what your strengths are, to even ask for advice on how to practically go ahead and to have personal interactions around this time. So and leadership skills are anyway going to be very useful for you to learn, and management and so forth are the skills that you're not normally thinking about. So it's good to kind of ask yourself, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and how can I own these in the next steps ahead.
Great, thanks. And then finally, Megan?
Yeah, so I wanted to just touch briefly on something that we haven't really discussed, which is how to know if you want a PI position and how you know whether you're ready for a PI position. And so I want to say two things about that really quickly. One is that I was always the sort of student who was as happy writing grants and giving talks and being student representative as I was doing experiments. And that meant that I wasn't sure a lot of the time through my PhD and my postdoc if I really wanted to stay in science, to be honest. And now I'm a PI and I love it. Because all of those other skills and all of those other things that I used to love, as much as I loved doing experiments at least, I now get to do all the time. And so for those of you who might be a little bit like me that aren't sure, but you kind of like that other stuff and you think maybe when you're a PI it'll be good to use it, I think hang in there, because that stuff, the skills that you need at different stages change, and so that can really work out. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that I was asked just yesterday by a student, when did I know that I could really make it as a PI? And he clearly was asking me a different question from the one I answered, because what I told him was 2 years ago, which was several years after starting a position as a PI. So I think a lot of us feel this way, and it can be hard to believe that you can really do it. And sometimes it just takes doing it to know. So don't not apply because you're not sure that you can do it, because if you've been successful at every stage of your career, moderately successful at every stage of your career, there's nothing magical about it. You can probably do it just like you did the other stuff.
Great. Thank you. Thanks to all of the panelists. This was a really exciting discussion, and I also learned a lot from it. We invite the audience to continue asking questions on Twitter. You can tweet at eLife_careers using the ECR Wednesday hashtag. I think most of the panelists will be on Twitter approximately the next hour or so, and we'll try to answer the questions that we see coming in on there. Thank you to everyone for participating. This was really fun.
Thanks.
Thank you.